I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're listening to the only story that matters. It's weekly, ongoing, and there's nothing else like it. There's nothing else written by one person than recorded by them in one single, flawless take. There's no other podcast done in the style of the Scandinavian bards known as skalds. This episode picks up right where the last one left off, but you should absolutely feel comfortable starting here. In fact, it'll be fun figuring things out. After you've listened to this episode, after you're a newly minted SKALD superfan, check out the previous episodes of the podcast, or catch up on what you've missed with the prose volumes available exclusively on Amazon. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, part 85. Maul lunged wildly across the overturned table, with his cudgel in his fist and with madness in his one remaining eye. Leaping over the splintered table, leaping over the discarded food that now covered the floor, Maul sprang forth with a shocking alacrity, roaring as he sent his club, that blackened branch of the world tree, sent it sailing in a wide arc toward the shocked and terrified vermin prince. He had tried to calm the savage, tried to calm that vicious, truculent destroyer. But it had been no use. Maul had made his demand, had commanded the vermin prince to tell him what he wanted to know, to reveal the location of the ambassador of the high elf of Harana. And that simpering fool had failed to comply. To deny a guest is simply rude. To deny a savage is foolish. But to deny a king, to deny the one true king of men, the one true king of flames and ashes, that was suicide. And so, Maul made to assert his royal authority, his regal prerogative, and he aimed to crush the vermin prince's skull under his cudgel. But when Maul landed on the other side of the table, when his cudgel had completed its swing, he found that it had connected with nothing but air. The vermin prince hadn't dodged, he hadn't evaded, he hadn't performed some tricky maneuver to dance out of Maul's range. No, he was too scared, too shocked, too exhausted, too cravenly and worthless for that. Instead, terrified by Maul's roar, by his near instantaneous charge, the vermin prince, in his fright, in his terror, in his cowardice, had thrown himself back, anything to escape Maul's reach, but in doing so, he had sent himself sprawling out upon the ground. The vermin prince had been saved by his pusillanimity, but standing nearby, watching silently, Ho had not. Because he was not some up-jumped prince. He was not a man who had simply declared himself great. Ho had earned his greatness through knowledge, through struggle, through talent, and through expertise. Though recently degraded, though cast down by choices, his own and of those around him, Ho was something more. Something better. So he did not simply scramble away. He did not fall to the ground like a craven insect. No, he stood watching that violent brute, the one with food still stuck to his face, with drink staining the rags he clothed himself in. He stood, and though he was intimidated, though he was in awe of that savage with his leathery skin stained by slowly, steadily moving blue sigils and runes, he stood and he did what had become second nature to him after decades of training, decades of fighting. He relaxed his body into a fighting stance. Ho did not mean to strike the brute, did not mean to fight the savage. He only wished to evade him. But Maul didn't know that. He couldn't know that. He knew nothing of fighting styles or stances, knew nothing but what little he remembered from his training as a child in the elf realm, knew nothing beyond the fact that if he swung hard enough, swung fast enough, swung viciously enough, eventually he would prevail. So Maul didn't know what kind of stance Ho had lowered himself into. Couldn't tell that it was one meant for defense, not offense. And so, confronted with a new challenge, confronted with someone clearly ready for combat, Maul decided to give Ho exactly what he expected, what he so clearly desired and yearned for. Maul decided to give him a fight. Without turning, only merely glancing in Ho's direction, looking over his shoulder with his one good eye, Maul unleashed a vicious backswing, one that though artless, though aimed at no specific part of Ho's body, would have nonetheless finished the fight then and there. It was a monstrous swing, one that no matter where it hit would have delivered enough force to send Ho crumpling to the ground, susceptible to whatever grisly intentions the savage possessed. But by the time the cudgel reached its intended target, just as had happened before, that intended target wasn't there. Ho had moved out of the way, but unlike the vermin prince who had fallen backward out of cowardice, Ho's actions were those of strategy, of tactics, as he bent fully backwards at the waist, allowing Maul's cudgel to simply pass over him. As Maul turned, as he turned to face his opponent, Ho was already in motion once again. He wasn't anywhere near drunk enough, nowhere near drunk enough to face a threat so great as this hateful destroyer. But thankfully, he had been drinking, had been sipping his wine quickly at the table. It was a desperate attempt to blind himself to the horrors he had seen, the horrors that still lurked behind his eyes. It had failed in that respect. But thankfully, it had left him slightly better suited to deal with that self-proclaimed king. Before righting himself, before straightening his bent form, Ho twisted to the left, shooting his right leg out at his opponent. His wrapped, skinny foot collided directly with Maul's knee, not hard enough to break it, if Ho even could muster up the strength for such an attack. It was just hard enough to cause it to buckle, to drop Maul to the ground. A strike meant to distract him. Ho fell deftly to the ground, distributing his weight across his body as he landed upon that filth-strewn floor. And as he did so, he saw that his kick was a success. that he had successfully sent the destroyer down upon his knee. But he also saw something else. He saw that he had failed, that his kick had failed in its true purpose, in its most important purpose, because Maul, the one true king of men, remained undistracted. Maul, though slowed, though irritated, though enraged, remained undistracted, remained unswerving in his commitment to his bloody goal, remained dead set on seizing Ho, seizing Master Ho, formerly of Ravena's revered seven masters, dead set on laying his hands upon the old man and beating the breath out of him. And so, without bothering to stand, without adjusting or even tending to his knee, he simply leaned forward, reaching out with that massive, calloused hand. Master Ho was quick. His lightning reflexes had been dulled with age, but they were still there, still lurking beneath the surface of his intoxication. But he was also grounded. He was also unprepared. He wasn't ready for his distracting strike, so expertly delivered, to be so useless, to go unheeded by this brute, this savage, this destroyer. He tried to squirm away, though he tried to pull in his legs to get away from the savage. It was no use. Maul reached out and seized him. His left hand locked itself around Ho's ankle, and the terrified old man saw a crazed smile begin to stretch across Maul's face. Ho tried to pull free, tried to slide his skinny, delicate ankle from the monster's grip. But it was no use. Maul's hand was a vice, clamped down so tightly that not even the fetid air of those tunnels could slip through. As the vermin prince screamed, as he called out for help, called out for the servants that the one true king of flames and ashes had demanded vacated as he ate, Maul pulled Ho toward him. He dragged him across that filthy floor, dragged him through food and through dirt and through worse, pulling him toward him with his left hand as his right rose up above his head, clutching that awful, grisly weapon, that notched, blackened cudgel, that simple branch of the world tree, holding it aloft, ready to come crashing down in an act of sudden, terrible violence. Ho knew that he couldn't escape Maul's grasp, knew that he was in no position to dodge his attacks, knew that a blow dealt by Maul's hardened, corded muscles, the ones that rippled underneath burnt skin and shifting blue runes, he knew that even if it didn't kill him outright, it would have left him susceptible, left him open to the blow that would. If his situation weren't so dire, he might have even laughed at the discovery that Maul, too, in his own fashion, made use of the distracting strike. Maul drew him closer, drew him too close, far too close, as the cudgel reached its apex, reached its zenith. He had to do something. He had to do anything to buy himself a few moments to free himself from the destroyer's grasp. And so he did. Rolling to the left, rolling toward his captured leg, he swung his right leg up and around, using the momentum of his twisting body to force it forward, to drive it forward, to drive it directly into Maul's temple. It was an unorthodox maneuver, even for one such as Ho, whose style was built upon the unorthodox, built upon idiosyncrasy. It was a desperate attack, The type of desperate attack that was neither distracting strike nor mercy blow. An attack grown out of the desperation that had previously been his undoing. But he had no choice. He was dead. It wouldn't matter how exquisitely he had used the 8-armed technique. The knuckles of his foot crashed into Maul's temple. The impact so great that it caused Maul to see stars in his one good eye, which he clenched shut as he howled and fell to the side, taken aback, taken unaware by the shocking strength that the old man still possessed. And as he fell to the side, as he shot his hand to his head, he released his grip upon Ho's ankle. Ho leapt to his feet, ignoring the arthritis that normally convinced him to rise more slowly, because now he had absolutely no time to spare. He hadn't meant his kick as a distracting strike, hadn't meant it as a way to open his opponent up for the mercy blow, but what he saw before him, the savage, grounded, his one eye closed, wincing, in pain for at least one moment longer. It was too good of an opportunity to miss. So Ho acted. Ho went into action. He charged Maul, knowing that if he was to deliver a mercy blow, now was the time. Now was the only time. He ran at the grounded savage, leaping toward him, bending his right leg and driving his knee forward, flying through the air behind that bent, knobby knee, that hinge of hardened bone. He ran, he leapt, and he kneed his opponent with a thunderous strike that landed directly upon Maul's jaw. The crack reverberated throughout the room. It seemed to vibrate up Ho's leg and into his ribcage, a wild vibration that Ho knew would stop once he landed, once he steadied himself upon the filthy ground of those labyrinthine caves and tunnels. But to Ho's surprise, to his alarm, he didn't land. He didn't move at all because he had once again been seized by the savage. Though the blow connected, though it was as powerful, as devastating, as violent and vicious and merciful a blow as Ho had ever dealt a foe, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to kill Maul or even knock him unconscious. And the savage, even while taking such a monumental blow, even while suffering through such an attack, he had dropped his cudgel, he had raised his hands, and he had seized Ho, with one hand upon his neck and the other clutching his sordid rags. Held there, suspended in the air, Ho was shocked, amazed, bewildered. Though his attack had rattled Maul's brains, though it had shaken his senses, though it was enough to crack the skull of any normal, sane man, Ho looked down and he saw the truth. Maul was no normal man. The one true king of flames and ashes was not a sane man. And that blow, the one that should have sent him cascading into unconsciousness, it had no effect on a mind as broken and shattered as his. Ho couldn't keep up with what came next. The hard, calloused hand around his throat, the rush of air in his ears, the hard, unforgiving floor smashing into his back, and his breath forcibly exiting his lungs. His wind had been knocked out of him. It didn't even matter. Even if his lungs were working, even if he could draw breath, there was no way he could get the air down to them. Get it down the throat that Maul had clenched shut as he loomed over him, screaming unintelligibly, spittle falling like hot rain upon Ho's face. Maul had dropped his cudgel. He didn't need it. All he needed were those massive, brutal hands that had done and would still do far, far worse than they did there, than they did to the foolish old man who tried to trade blows with him, that tried to stand against the one true king of men. He raised that heavy hand, and still screaming, he clenched it into a massive fist. Ho knew that it was the end. The darkness was closing in on him, and he felt his body spasming with the lack of oxygen, with the panic that impending death carried with it. There was nothing serene about a trip into the inky black void of nothingness. There was nothing merciful about being sent there, about being forced into the abyss, and Ho knew that. He understood it as the entire world started to shake around him, began to rumble and tremble as if it was falling apart at the seams. But suddenly, the pressure on his neck abated. The hot rain ceased to fall upon his face, and as the light came back into his eyes, as it chased away the darkness, he saw that his attacker, that savage, that brute, the destroyer, that Maul had fallen back upon his haunches, clutching his hands to his ears and howling. No! What is it? No, not again! Stop! Ho gasped loudly, desperate to fill his lungs with air while he still could, not knowing what was happening or whether he'd get another chance to breathe before the savage was upon him once again. And as he did so, he noticed that the rumbling, the shaking, and the tremors that he had felt, they were not in his mind. They were not his imagination. They were not some beckoning call from the inky black void of nothingness. They were real, and they continued, shaking the entire room, causing dirt and rocks to dislodge themselves from the ceiling and come tumbling down to the floor. What is it? Where are they? Maul howled and screeched, pounding his head upon the floor, hitting it so hard that his forehead burst open, leaving gruesome splotches of blood on the already filthy floor. No, not again! Ho slowly, silently slid away from the brute as the vermin prince, emboldened by the group of followers that had rushed in to help him, the ones that had watched silently as Maul tried to murder Ho. The old man now himself watched as the vermin prince approached the destroyer. The centaurs, they're attacking the city. My city. Maul looked up at the vermin prince. A crazed, confused, helpless look in his single eye. The centaurs. Slowly, understanding dawned on him. The centaurs. Ravana. The vermin prince grinned, but drew no closer. That dangerous brute. Yes, the centaurs. They're stampeding. They're marching upon central Ravana. Maul was confused, but tried to force himself to understand, shaking his head, sending droplets of blood flying, hoping to put the pieces of his shattered mind back into place. But how beat them? How can we? The vermin prince crouched down, balancing on his one good leg as he spoke softly, soothingly to this tormented destroyer. Exactly. That's why we need the elves. They're building machines. This is why we need Enlith. Enlith. Maul growled the name, and he began to rise slowly, steadily, murder pulsing through every one of his clenched muscles. No, no! The Vermin Prince panicked, grasping at his followers to pull himself up to his feet, then scrambling to get behind them, to place them between himself and that hulking monster, the one whose mind was racked with indescribable agonies. You won't even see her. She'll send others. She will not come here herself. Maul stooped to retrieve his cudgel once again. She'll come as soon as she learns that I'm here. He grinned wickedly. She could never stay away. The Vermin Prince, still hiding behind his followers, spoke timidly. What are you going to do? Maul sneered at his host. I'll do what we discussed. I'll perform my part of things. I'll storm the tower. I'll kill the proctors. I'll beat the breath out of the witch. I'll enjoy it. And then I will take the spear. He pointed menacingly at the Vermin Prince. And then you will send me back. You will send me to my home before Enlith comes. He then turned, suddenly, to Ho. And you will come with me. Ho spoke in a wounded, strained voice, one damaged by having Maul's hand clamped around his throat. But why? Because I demand it! Maul roared, flexing every muscle in his body. Then, wincing, he calmed himself. He spoke again. Because I see something familiar in you. Ho was confused, fascinated, terrified, but mesmerized. He began to move toward Maul slowly. Where were you? Where did they pull you from? Maul lowered his brows. I cannot say. Words cannot describe it. Not truly. And even if I could say, even if I could tell you, you would not wish to hear it. Ho stared at the brute, stared at his one flashing eye, stared at the scorched skin, stared at the slowly twisting and turning sigils just beneath it. Were you like me once? Maul laughed. A riotous, cruel guffaw. No, I was never like you. Ho swallowed hard and continued, knowing just how dangerous the path he walked truly was, but unable to turn back. But you weren't always like this, were you? The brute shook his head slowly. No. Then, what happened? Maul drew closer to Ho, towering over the old man, and as he did so, he allowed his lips to curl up into a vicious, hateful, sardonic, rictus grin. I survived. I survived as all mortal men do. By making a common cause with one demon or another. Thanks for listening to this, the best episode of SKALD yet. I am so proud of the show, so proud of the quality, the consistency, and the fact that something as strange and unique as SKALD has been able to find its audience, to find you. And seeing as you're digging the show, seeing as you enjoy your weekly trip to the Sundered Worlds, please do the right thing. Help other people find out about it by leaving the show a good review on iTunes or Stitcher. This is the absolute best way to help people find out about the show, to help it stand out amongst the throngs of podcasts crowding the internet. Do right by spreading the word about the only story that matters. SKALD is made possible through the donations of people just like you. People who enjoy SKALD and want it to continue coming out weekly. People who go to patreon.com/SKALD and sign up for a small monthly donation to ensure that's the case. This money goes to cover not just podcast and web hosting fees, but also to help cover the time that I lovingly spend on this show each and every week. Time that's not spent doing paying work. Eventually, a time is going to come when I get offered paying work that will make it impossible for me to keep up with SKALD. I don't want that to happen. You don't want that to happen. I want to keep doing SKALD forever. So please, help make SKALD a self-sufficient, ongoing project. I'd much rather tell stories for you than for anyone else. As always, if you want more information about me, SKALD, my wrestling talk show Straight Shoot, my comics work, including the upcoming G.I. Joe series at IDW, contact information, bio, social media, merch, or anything else, you have to head to AubreySitterson.com. It has links to everything, including an opportunity to buy a copy of my comic book work, Street Fighter G.I. Joe. If you like fights, which you're listening to SKALD, so you must, you are going to love Street Fighter G.I. Joe. It's nothing but. Finally, my weekly recommendation. I record things ahead of time, so by the time you hear this, it will have been out for a few weeks. But none of that matters to me right now, because right now, today, I've been rocking the balls out to Red Fang's newest album, Only Ghosts. I guess it could technically be called stoner or sludge metal, but what it really is driving, hooky, guitar-heavy rock music. It's available on Spotify, and it's well worth your time. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.